Amira stood at the window of her uncle's sprawling Dubai mansion, her delicate fingers tracing patterns on the ornate glass as she watched the setting sun paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. At 23, she should have been living her dreams, but instead, she found herself trapped in a world of gilded luxury that felt more like a prison with each passing day. The sound of expensive heels clicking against marble floors announced her Aunt Fatima's approach before the woman's reflection appeared in the window beside her. "Amira, darling, you should be helping the staff prepare for tonight's dinner party. Not daydreaming again." The words were honey-sweet, but Amira had learned long ago to detect the steel beneath the sugar. "Yes, Aunt Fatima," she replied automatically, turning away from the window. The massive chandelier above cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor, a daily reminder of the opulent world she inhabited but never truly belonged to. Since losing her parents at a young age, she had lived with her uncle Hassan and Aunt Fatima, existing in a strange limbo between family member and servant. As she made her way to the kitchen, Amira's thoughts drifted to her morning escape. Every day she would slip out for an hour, supposedly to run errands for the household. In reality, those precious moments of freedom were spent at a small bicycle repair shop tucked away in a quieter corner of the city. There she had found an unexpected friend in Karim, the shop's owner. Karim's simple wisdom and genuine smile had become her anchor in a world of artificial pleasantries. Just that morning, he had been teaching her how to true a bicycle wheel, his capable hands guiding hers as they worked together. "Sometimes," he had said, "the most beautiful things in life are the simplest ones." The memory of his words brought a small smile to her face as she entered the bustling kitchen. The evening's dinner party was like countless others before it, a parade of Dubai's elite, each trying to outshine the other with their wealth and connections. Amira moved through the crowd like a ghost, refilling glasses and arranging fresh flowers, all while trying to make herself as invisible as possible. However, she couldn't help but notice one particular guest who seemed different from the others. Ibrahim al-Rashid commanded attention without seeking it. Unlike the other businessmen who laughed too loudly and gestured too broadly, he observed everything with quiet intensity. Several times throughout the evening, Amira felt his gaze following her, and each time she hurried away, her heart beating a little faster. Later that night, as she helped clean up after the last guest had departed, she overheard her uncle in his study, his voice raised in agitation. "The deadline is impossible. You can't expect me to gather that kind of money in a..." "Just 2 weeks." There was a pause and then more subdued. "Please, there must be another way." Amira's hand froze in the act of collecting empty glasses. She had noticed subtle changes in the household over the past few months. Fewer new purchases, whispered, arguments between her aunt and uncle, and a growing tension that seemed to permeate every room. Now pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The next morning, she hurried to the bicycle shop earlier than usual, her mind heavy with worries about her uncle's mysterious troubles. The familiar ring of the shop's bell as she entered brought an immediate sense of comfort. Karim looked up from the bike he was working on, his face breaking into a warm smile that made her momentarily forget her concerns. "You're early today," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Is everything all right?" Before she could answer, the shop's door chimed again. Amira turned to see Ibrahim al-Rashid himself standing in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the morning sun. His eyes met hers with the same intensity she had noticed at the dinner party, and in that moment, she felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted imperceptibly. What she didn't know then was that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. The simple patterns of her daily existence, her secret visits to the bicycle shop, her careful navigation of her aunt and uncle's expectations, her dreams of a different life, were about to be completely transformed. As Ibrahim stepped into the shop, Amira noticed something in his expression that she hadn't seen the night before, a flicker of vulnerability, quickly masked by his usual composure. It was brief, but it made her wonder what other secrets lay behind his carefully maintained facade. She would soon learn that in Dubai's world of wealth and power, nothing was quite as it seemed, and even the most carefully constructed plans could be undone by the simple power of human emotion. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bicycle shop's worn wooden floor as Ibrahim al-Rashid's presence filled the small space. Amira felt herself holding her breath, caught between two worlds, the simple sanctuary she had found with Karim and the opulent universe that Ibrahim represented. The businessman's expensive suit seemed out of place among the tools and spare parts, yet he moved through the shop with unexpected ease. "I didn't expect to find you here, Miss Amira," Ibrahim said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to command. His eyes, however, held a question that made her uncomfortable. "It seems we share an interest in unexpected places." Karim stepped forward, subtly positioning himself between Amira and the newcomer. "Welcome to my shop, Mr. Al-Rashid. How can I help you today?" His usual warm tone carried an edge Amira had never heard before. Ibrahim's lips curved into a slight smile. "My nephew's bicycle needs repairs. I was told this is the best shop in the area." He pulled out his phone, showing a picture of an expensive racing bicycle. As he and Karim discussed the repairs, Amira noticed how Ibrahim's gaze kept returning to her, as if trying to solve a puzzle. The morning's peace shattered, Amira made her excuses and hurried back to the mansion. Her mind raced with questions. Why had Ibrahim really come to the shop? Had he followed her? The weight of his attention at the dinner party took on new significance. She arrived home to find the mansion in chaos. Her Aunt Fatima was pacing the marble foyer, phone pressed to her ear, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her arm. "Hassan, you must come home immediately. The bank manager is here and he's not leaving without answers." Amira slipped past her aunt and made her way to the kitchen, but even there she couldn't escape the tension. The staff spoke in whispers about unpaid salaries and rumors of financial trouble. She thought of the family's loyal employees, the cook who had secretly taught her traditional recipes, the gardener who always saved the freshest flowers for her room, the housekeeper who had been like a second mother to her. Their livelihoods hung in the balance of whatever crisis was unfolding. Later that afternoon, Amira found herself in the mansion's library, ostensibly dusting the shelves but actually trying to overhear the heated discussion in her uncle's adjacent study. The bank manager's voice carried through the wall, clinical and cold. "Mr. Hassan, your assets are no longer sufficient collateral. Without immediate payment, we'll have no choice but to proceed with foreclosure." Her uncle's response was barely audible, but his desperate tone made her heart ache. She had never heard him sound so defeated. The man who had taken her in after her parents' passing, who had given her a home despite his wife's initial reluctance, now seemed to be drowning in troubles she couldn't fully comprehend. The sound of approaching footsteps sent her scurrying deeper into the library. Through the gaps between books, she watched Ibrahim al-Rashid enter her uncle's study. The bank manager left shortly after, and the sounds of conversation became too muffled to distinguish, but she could feel the weight of whatever was being discussed. That evening, Amira sat at her bedroom window watching the city lights flicker to life across Dubai's skyline. Her phone buzzed with a message from Karim. "Are you okay? You seemed troubled this morning." His concern warmed her heart, but she couldn't find the words to respond. How could she explain the growing sense that her world was about to change dramatically? A knock at her door startled her. Her Aunt Fatima entered, looking uncharacteristically subdued. "Amira, dear, your uncle, and I need to speak with you in the study." Something in her aunt's tone made Amira's stomach twist with apprehension. In the study, her uncle Hassan sat behind his massive desk, looking years older than he had just days before. Ibrahim al-Rashid stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the evening sky. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. "Amira," her uncle began, his voice rough with emotion, "you know we have always considered you as our own daughter." He paused, exchanging a look with Ibrahim that made Amira's pulse quicken. "Sometimes in life, we must make difficult decisions for the good of the family. Mr. al-Rashid has made us an unexpected proposal." Ibrahim turned from the window, his dark eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her want to step back. But something in his gaze, a flicker of what might have been uncertainty, caught her attention. This powerful man, who could apparently solve her uncle's financial troubles with a wave of his hand, seemed almost nervous. "The proposal," her uncle continued, "concerns you, my dear, and the future of this family." The study seemed to shrink around Amira as her uncle's words hung in the air. The antique clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each excruciating second of silence. Ibrahim stepped forward, his presence commanding yet somehow different from his usual authoritative demeanor. "Miss Amira," Ibrahim began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I realize this may seem sudden, but I would like to propose marriage." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the room. "In return, I will ensure your family's financial security and the continuation of the lifestyle you've known." The world tilted beneath Amira's feet. She gripped the back of a nearby chair, her knuckles turning white. Marriage? To Ibrahim al-Rashid? The man was at least 15 years her senior, known throughout Dubai for his brilliant business acumen and unwavering determination. She had heard rumors of his solitary lifestyle, his reputation for being calculating and cold in both business and personal matters. I need some air," she managed to whisper, turning toward the door. No one stopped her as she fled the study, her feet carrying her through the mansion's elaborate corridors until she reached the garden. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine, but even its familiar comfort couldn't calm her racing heart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, another message from Karim. "The shop feels empty without you today. I hope everything's all right." The simple kindness in his words made her eyes burn with unshed tears. How could she explain that her world was crumbling around her? Footsteps on the garden path made her quickly wipe her eyes. Her Aunt Fatima approached, her silk kaftan rustling softly in the evening breeze. "Amira, my dear, I know this is overwhelming." Her aunt's voice carried an unusual note of genuine concern. "But you must understand what's at stake." "What's at stake?" Amira turned to face her aunt, emotion finally breaking through her usual careful restraint. "My entire future is at stake. How can Uncle Hassan even consider such an arrangement?" Fatima's face hardened slightly. "Your uncle has sacrificed everything to keep this family's honor intact. When he took you in, he didn't hesitate, despite our financial situation even then. Now all of us, including the staff you care so much about, face ruin unless—" She left the sentence hanging. The mention of the staff struck Amira like a physical blow. She thought of old Ahmed, the gardener who had worked for the family for 30 years, of Nadia in the kitchen whose daughter was about to start university, of all the families who depended on her uncle's household for their livelihood. Back in her room, Amira sat at her vanity, staring at her reflection without really seeing it. The girl who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, someone caught between childhood and womanhood, between duty and desire. Her fingers found the delicate pendant her mother had left her, its familiar shape offering little comfort tonight. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting her aunt again. Instead, Ibrahim entered, remaining near. The door as if conscious of propriety. In the soft lamplight, she noticed subtle details she had missed before, a touch of grey at his temples, slight lines around his eyes that spoke of more than just age. "I apologize for ambushing you earlier," he said, his voice low and controlled. "I should have found a better way to present my proposal." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I want you to understand that while this arrangement would solve your family's financial troubles, that's not my only motivation." Amira met his gaze in the mirror. "Then what is your motivation, Mr. Al-Rashid?" "Ibrahim, please." He took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I've observed you, Amira. Your grace under pressure, your kindness to others regardless of their status, your quiet strength. These are rare qualities in my world of transaction and appearances." His words surprised her, as did the hint of vulnerability in his tone. She turned to face him directly. "And what of love? Does that have any place in your proposal?" A shadow passed across his face. "I believe mutual respect and understanding can build a stronger foundation than fleeting emotion." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I won't pressure you for an immediate answer. Take time to consider your decision carefully." After he left, Amira returned to her window, watching the city lights blur through her tears. Her phone buzzed. Again Karim, sending her a photo of a sunset taken from his shop with the message, "Sometimes beauty finds us in unexpected moments. Remember, you always have a friend here." The contrast between Karim's simple, heartfelt gesture and Ibrahim's calculated proposal made her chest ache. Yet she couldn't ignore the reality of her situation. Her decision wouldn't affect just her. It would impact everyone in her uncle's household. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The following morning dawned with an unusual chill in the Dubai air. Amira found herself at the bicycle shop earlier than usual, her heart heavy with the weight of decisions yet unmade. The familiar ring of the bell as she entered seemed to echo her turbulent emotions. Karim looked up from his workbench, his welcoming smile fading as he took in her troubled expression. "You look like you haven't slept," he said softly, putting down his tools. The concern in his voice nearly broke her composure. "Everything's changing, Karim," she whispered, sinking onto the wooden stool beside his workbench. The shop's familiar scents of oil and rubber wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. "My uncle is in serious financial trouble, and there's a solution offered, but the price—" Her voice trailed off. Karim wiped his hands on a rag and pulled up another stool. "Does this have something to do with Ibrahim al-Rashid's visit yesterday?" His usually gentle tone carried an edge of worry. Amira nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "He's proposed marriage. In exchange, he'll solve all my uncle's financial problems." The words felt bitter on her tongue. The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally looked up, she saw something raw and painful in Karim's expression before he carefully masked it. "And what do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want—" Amira's voice caught. What did she want? Freedom, love, the luxury of choosing her own path. "I want to not feel responsible for everyone else's happiness," she finally admitted. Karim reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her hand with his. "You're not responsible for their choices, Amira. Your uncle's financial troubles aren't your burden to bear." Before she could respond, the shop's door chimed. They quickly separated as a customer entered, but the warmth of Karim's touch lingered on her skin. Later that day, Amira found herself in the mansion's vast kitchen, helping Nadia prepare lunch. The older woman had been more of a mother to her than her Aunt Fatima ever was, and right now, she desperately needed motherly wisdom. "Nadia," she began, carefully chopping vegetables, "how do you know when you're making the right choice, when duty pulls you one way and your heart another?" The cook paused in her work, studying Amira's face. "This is about Mr. al-Rashid's proposal, isn't it?" At Amira's surprised look, she smiled sadly. "News travels fast among the staff, Habibi." "What would you do?" Amira asked, setting down her knife. Nadia wiped her hands on her apron, considering her words carefully. "When I was young, my parents arranged my marriage. I was terrified, angry even. But my husband turned out to be a good man. Different from what I imagined for myself, but good." She paused, adding spices to the simmering pot. Sometimes the heart needs time to recognize what the mind already knows. The afternoon found Amira in the mansion's library, seeking solitude among the leather-bound volumes. To her surprise, she found Ibrahim there, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows. He turned at her entrance, and for a moment, she caught an expression of such profound loneliness on his face that it stopped her in her tracks. "Please don't leave on my account," he said quickly, noticing her hesitation. "I actually hoped we might talk." Amira moved further into the room, maintaining a careful distance. "About the proposal. About expectations," he corrected, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I want you to understand that if you accept, you wouldn't be a prisoner. You would have freedom to pursue your interests, your education, whatever you wish. Accept love." The words escaped before she could stop them. Ibrahim's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I learned long ago that love is a luxury not all of us can afford, but I can offer respect, partnership, and the chance to make a difference in many lives." He turned back to the window. "My wealth could do more than just save your uncle's household. Together, We could help countless others. His words stirred something unexpected in Amira. Not romance or passion, but a glimpse of possibility she hadn't considered. The chance to transform lives, to have real impact beyond the walls of her uncle's mansion. That evening, she returned to the bicycle shop after closing time. Karim was alone, cleaning up for the day. The sight of him, honest, hard-working, with dreams as pure as his heart, made her chest ache with what might have been. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, setting aside his broom. "I know it's not much, but I've been saving to expand the shop. If you'll wait, give me time." He trailed off, the unspoken offer hanging between them like a fragile thread. Amira felt tears welling in her eyes. In another life, perhaps, his offer would have been enough, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than ever. The faces of everyone depending on her decision flashed through her mind. Her uncle, the staff, their families. The dawn light filtered through the gossamer curtains of Amira's room as she stood before her mirror, adjusting her hijab with trembling fingers. Today would change everything. After a sleepless night filled with tears and soul-searching, she had made her decision. The weight of it sat heavy in her chest, like a stone pressed against her heart. In the early morning quiet, she made her way to her uncle's study. Hassan sat at his desk looking older than she had ever seen him, worry lines etched deeply into his face. When she entered, he looked up with tired eyes that held a glimmer of hope. "Uncle," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I've made my decision. I will marry Mr. Al-Rashid." The relief that flooded his face made her throat tighten with emotion. He rose from his chair, crossed the room, and embraced her for the first time since she was a child. "My dear girl," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish circumstances were different. I wish I could give you the choice you deserve." Before she could respond, Aunt Fatima burst into the study, her face glowing with barely contained excitement. "Oh, wonderful news. I'll start planning immediately. We must have the engagement party within the week. There's so much to arrange." Amira stepped back from her uncle's embrace, feeling suddenly cold. The reality of her decision began to sink in as her aunt rattled off plans for flowers, guests, and celebrations. This wasn't just about saving her family anymore. She was about to become Mrs. Al-Rashid, wife to one of Dubai's most powerful men. Later that morning, she made her way to the bicycle shop one last time. The familiar bell chimed as she entered, but today its sound seemed to echo with finality. Karim looked up from his work, his smile fading as he read her expression. "You've decided," he said simply. It wasn't a question. Amira nodded, unable to trust her voice. Karim set down his tools and walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened bird. "I understand," he said softly, though the pain in his eyes told a different story. "You're doing what you think is right." "I have to," she whispered, tears threatening to fall. "There are so many people depending on this. I can't be selfish." Karim reached out and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Choosing your own happiness isn't selfish, Amira, but choosing to sacrifice it for others, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." His words broke something inside her, and she found herself wrapped in his embrace, crying into his shoulder. He held her silently, his own tears falling into her hair. For a moment, they allowed themselves to imagine what might have been, a simpler life, filled with honest work and genuine love. The shop's bell chimed again, startling them apart. Ibrahim stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. Amira quickly wiped her eyes, but she knew it was too late. He had seen everything. To her surprise, Ibrahim's face softened slightly. "Miss Amira," he said, his voice gentler than she expected. "I came to discuss the engagement arrangements, but I see this isn't the best time. Perhaps we could meet later at the mansion." She nodded mutely, grateful for his unexpected tact. As Ibrahim turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not anger or jealousy, but what looked almost like understanding, tinged with a deep sadness of his own. That afternoon, she found Ibrahim waiting in the mansion's garden. He stood among the blooming bougainvillea, his usual sharp business suit replaced by more casual attire that somehow made him seem more human. "I won't pretend I didn't see what happened this morning," he began, his voice measured. "And I won't insult you by asking if you love him." He paused, studying a nearby flower. "But I want you to know that I respect your choice, Amira. Your sacrifice won't be in vain." She looked at him with new eyes, seeing past his powerful facade to glimpse the complex man beneath. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have chosen anyone. Why choose someone whose heart belongs to another?" Ibrahim's expression shifted, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Perhaps because I understand what it means to choose duty over desire, to live with the consequences of impossible choices." He turned to face her fully. "I don't expect your love, Amira, but I hope that in time we might build something meaningful together. A partnership based on mutual respect and understanding." As the sun set over Dubai's glittering skyline, Amira stood in her room, watching the city transform from gold to silver in the fading light. Her phone buzzed with messages from her aunt about engagement party details, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of Karim's tears, of Ibrahim's unexpected compassion, of the path that lay before her, a path she had chosen, yet one that felt chosen for her. The mansion transformed into a whirlwind of activity as wedding preparations consumed every corner. Aunt Fatima orchestrated an army of wedding planners, florists, and decorators, turning the already luxurious home into a showcase of opulence. Amira watched it all unfold, as if she were watching a play where she had been cast in the leading role without learning her lines. Ibrahim's wedding gift arrived early one morning, a stunning pearl and diamond necklace that made Aunt Fatima gasp in delight. But it was the note accompanying it that caught Amira's attention. "Pearls, like strength, are formed through adversity. You have shown me the true meaning of both." The unexpected poetry in his words made her pause, wondering again about the man she was about to marry. During a fitting for her wedding dress, a couture creation that cost more than most people's yearly salary, Amira overheard two seamstresses whispering about Ibrahim's past. "They say he hasn't truly smiled since his sister's accident," one murmured. "Poor man, he blamed himself for not being there when she needed him most." The snippet of conversation haunted Amira. That evening, when Ibrahim came to discuss wedding details, she found herself studying him more carefully. He sat in the mansion's formal living room, his usual commanding presence somehow subdued in the intimate setting. "Your sister," Amira began carefully, watching his reaction. "What was she like?" Ibrahim's hand, reaching for his tea, froze mid-air. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his shoulders softened slightly. "Layla was sunshine personified," he said quietly. "She could light up any room just by entering it. Unlike me, she never let our wealth change her heart." "What happened to her?" Amira asked gently. Ibrahim's eyes grew distant. "She was traveling to meet me in Paris. I was too busy with a business deal to pick her up from the airport myself. The driver I sent..." He trailed off, his hands clenching. "After that, I threw myself into work. It seemed easier than facing the emptiness she left behind." Understanding bloomed in Amira's heart. His controlled exterior, his focus on duty. Over emotion, they were armor against past pain. She reached out impulsively and touched his hand. The contact seemed to startle them both. The next day, Amira received an unexpected invitation from Ibrahim to visit his charitable foundation. The sleek office building in downtown Dubai housed more than just business ventures. Entire floors were dedicated to education programs, healthcare initiatives, and community development projects. "This was Layla's passion," Ibrahim explained, as he showed her around. "After she was gone, I promised to continue her work. It's become my way of keeping her memory alive." He paused before a wall of photos showing smiling children, new schools, and medical facilities. "I hope you'll consider taking an active role here after we're married." The offer surprised her. "You'd trust me with such responsibility?" "I've seen how you care for others, Amira. Your compassion isn't a weakness. It's exactly what these projects need." His words carried a weight of sincerity that touched something deep within her. As they left the foundation, Amira caught sight of a familiar figure across the street, Karim loading his bicycle repair tools into a small van. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, the pain of recognition visible even at a distance. Ibrahim noticed her distraction and followed her gaze, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said carefully as they drove back to the mansion, "the foundation has a program supporting small business development. Perhaps your friend's shop could benefit from some expansion funding." Amira turned to him in surprise. "You would do that? That's not personal charity. It's business development in communities that need it. His skills and dedication make him an ideal candidate." Ibrahim kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the slight tension in his jaw. "I may not be able to give you the kind of love you dream of, Amira, but I can try to ensure your happiness in other ways." That night, alone in her room, Amira found herself torn between gratitude for Ibrahim's unexpected kindness and guilt over her lingering feelings for Karim. The wedding was just days away, and while her head understood the choice she had made, her heart still ached with the complexity of her emotions. A message appeared on her phone. Karim, for the first time since her decision. "I'm leaving Dubai for a while. Need to clear my head. But before I go, I want you to know something. Your kindness changed my life, Amira. Whatever happens, hold on to that part of yourself. It's your true strength." The wedding day arrived with all the grandeur that money could buy. The mansion's gardens had been transformed into an enchanted paradise, with thousands of white roses and twinkling lights creating an ethereal atmosphere. As Amira stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, the weight of her elaborate wedding dress felt like armor against the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Nadia, the cook who had been like a mother to her, helped adjust her veil. "You look like a princess from the ancient tales," she said softly, her eyes glistening with tears. "But remember, Habibi, even princesses must learn to write their own stories." The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional rituals and modern pageantry. Amira moved through it all with practiced grace, speaking her vows with a steady voice that betrayed nothing of her inner turmoil. When she finally looked up to meet Ibrahim's eyes during the ceremony, she was struck by the intensity of emotion she saw there. Not triumph or satisfaction, but something deeper, almost vulnerable. Their new home was a penthouse apartment in one of Dubai's most exclusive towers, with views that made the city look like a jewelry box spilling its treasures into the desert. That first evening, as the sun set over the Arabian Gulf, Ibrahim surprised her by presenting her with an unexpected gift, a key. "This is your home now," he said carefully, placing the key in her palm. "I want you to feel free here, to make it your own space." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. "I know this isn't the marriage you dreamed of, but I hope we can build something meaningful together." The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Ibrahim, contrary to the rumors of his workaholic nature, made a point of having breakfast with her each morning. Their conversations, initially stilted and formal, gradually began to flow more naturally as they discovered shared interests in literature and art. One morning, about a week after the wedding, Amira found Ibrahim in his home office, surrounded by papers and looking unusually troubled. When she asked if everything was all right, he surprised her by actually sharing his concerns. "We're planning to build a new hospital in a rural area," he explained, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of frustration. "But the local community leaders are resistant to the project. They don't trust that we have their best interests at heart." Amira studied the project plans spread across his desk. "Have you considered asking the community what they need, rather than telling them what you think they should have?" Ibrahim looked up at her, startled by the simple wisdom of her suggestion. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Layla would have said exactly the same thing." The comparison seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. That afternoon, Ibrahim invited her to join him for a meeting with the foundation's board of directors. As she listened to the discussions about various charitable projects, she found herself drawn into the complexity of balancing business acumen with genuine humanitarian impact. "What do you think?" Ibrahim asked afterward, as they walked through the city's financial district. "Would you be interested in taking a more active role in the foundation?" The offer touched something in Amira. a desire to make a difference, to find purpose beyond the gilded constraints of her new life. "I would like that," she replied carefully, "but I'd want to focus on grassroots initiatives, working directly with communities." Ibrahim's face softened into a rare smile. "Just like Layla," he murmured, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't compare." "It's all right," Amira interrupted gently. She was clearly an extraordinary person. "I'm honored by the comparison." That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner on their penthouse balcony, Ibrahim suddenly said, "I saw something today that reminded me to ask, would you like to set up a workshop here? For your bicycle repair hobby?" The mention of bicycles sent a sharp pang through Amira's heart, memories of Karim flooding back. Ibrahim must have noticed her expression because he quickly added, "Or perhaps something else. I just thought, everyone needs something that's purely their own." His consideration touched her, even as it highlighted the complexity of their situation. Here was a man trying, in his own way, to make space for her happiness while respecting the boundaries of their arranged marriage. Later that night, unable to sleep, Amira stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their bedroom, watching the city lights below. In the reflection, she caught sight of Ibrahim in his study across the hall, his head bowed over work despite the late hour. The sight stirred an unexpected feeling of protectiveness. He was as much a prisoner of expectations and past pain as she was. A month into their marriage, Amira discovered something unexpected about Ibrahim during a late-night thunderstorm. The rain pounded against the penthouse windows with unusual ferocity for Dubai, and she found him standing in the darkness of their living room, his silhouette tense against the flashing sky. "I never liked storms," he admitted quietly when she approached. "Layla used to love them. She would drag me onto the balcony to watch the lightning, telling me that nature's power should be celebrated, not feared." His voice carried a warmth she rarely heard when he spoke of business matters. "Tell me more about her," Amira said softly, settling onto the plush sofa. To her surprise, Ibrahim joined her, maintaining a respectful distance but closer than they usually sat. "She was fearless," he began, his eyes distant with memories. "While I was always the careful one, planning every detail, Layla would throw herself into life with complete abandon. She taught art to children in refugee camps, rode motorcycles through the desert, and never met a stranger she couldn't turn into a friend." Lightning illuminated the room, and Amira caught a glimpse of tears in Ibrahim's eyes before darkness fell. Again. The day of the accident, she was rushing to tell me about her latest project, a mobile library for remote villages. I was too busy with a merger to take her call. Without thinking, Amira reached out and touched his hand. This time he didn't pull away. "She would be proud of how you've continued her work," she said gently. "Would she?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Sometimes I wonder if I've turned her dreams into just another business venture." The vulnerability in his tone made something shift in Amira's heart. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Show me her projects, her plans. Maybe together, we can ensure they maintain the spirit she intended." The next day, Ibrahim took her to a storage facility where he kept Layla's belongings. Among carefully preserved artwork and personal items, they found journals filled with her vision for community projects. Layla's passion jumped off the pages, in vibrant sketches and enthusiastic notes. She saw beauty everywhere, Ibrahim explained, carefully turning the pages of one journal. "Even in broken things." He paused, looking at Amira with unexpected intensity. "Like that bicycle shop where I first saw you. Layla would have loved that place. The simplicity, the honest work, the way it served the community." The mention of the shop brought a familiar ache to Amira's chest, but it was different now. A bittersweet memory rather than a sharp pain. "We could do something similar," she suggested. "Set up vocational training centers, teaching practical skills that help people build better lives." Ibrahim's face lit up with interest. "Using the foundation's resources, but maintaining the grassroots connection Layla valued so much." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious features. "Would you lead the project?" Over the next few weeks they spent their evenings developing the idea. their heads bent together over plans and proposals. Amira discovered that beneath Ibrahim's businesslike exterior lay a mind that could be surprisingly creative when freed from the constraints of corporate thinking. One evening, as they worked late in his home office, Ibrahim unexpectedly shared another piece of his past. Before our parents passed away, they were exactly what you'd expect of Dubai's elite, focused on appearances, social status, business, success. Layla was the one who taught me there could be more to life than that. Amira looked up from her laptop, struck by the parallel to her own life with her aunt and uncle. It's strange, she mused, how sometimes the people who are supposed to guide us can end up limiting our vision instead. While those who appear to have nothing to teach us turn out to be our greatest teachers, Ibrahim added softly, their eyes meeting in shared understanding. As they worked together on the training center project, Amira began to notice subtle changes in their dynamic. Ibrahim increasingly sought her opinion on foundation matters, genuinely listening to her perspectives. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, touching on subjects beyond work, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. One night, after a particularly successful meeting with community leaders, Ibrahim surprised her by suggesting they celebrate with dinner at a small, local restaurant rather than one of Dubai's luxury establishments. As they sat in the humble setting, enjoying simple but delicious food, Amira realized she was seeing yet another layer of this complex man, one who could set aside his usual formality and find joy in life's simpler pleasures. The autumn air in Paris carried a crisp sweetness that reminded Amira of new beginnings. She and Ibrahim had come to the City of Light for a series of meetings with international partners of the foundation, but the city seemed to hold a deeper significance for her husband. She noticed how his shoulders tensed slightly as their car wound through the elegant boulevards, his eyes distant with memories he had yet to share. Their hotel suite overlooked the Seine, the Eiffel Tower standing like a sentinel against the pastel sky. That first evening, instead of reviewing documents for the next day's meetings, Ibrahim suggested a walk along the river. The casual suggestion surprised her. He rarely deviated from his carefully planned schedules. As they strolled along the cobblestone paths, their steps fell into an easy rhythm. Street musicians played softly in the distance, their melodies carried on the evening breeze. Layla loved this city, Ibrahim said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. She said Paris was where people came to find their true selves. Is that why you brought the Foundation's international headquarters here? Amira asked gently, watching his profile in the gathering dusk. Partly, he admitted, but also because... He stopped walking, his gaze fixed on a particular bridge ahead of them. Because this is where I last spoke to her. She called me from that bridge, excited, about a new project. I was in a meeting, told her I'd call back later. His voice caught. There never was a later. Amira reached for his hand without thinking, and for the first time, he interlaced his fingers with hers. The intimate gesture felt both foreign and somehow right. They stood there in silence, watching the lights of passing boats dance on the dark water. The next morning, Amira woke with a fever and a violent chill. Ibrahim, finding her pale and shaking, immediately called for a doctor. His usual composed demeanor cracked as he paced the suite, waiting for medical help to arrive. I can't lose. You too, she heard him whisper when he thought she was sleeping, his voice raw with emotion. The doctor diagnosed a severe case of influenza, prescribing rest and medication. What followed were days that changed everything between them. Ibrahim cancelled all his meetings, choosing instead to stay by her side. He brought her soup, adjusted her pillows, and read to her from his sister's favorite books when the fever made it hard for her to focus. In her feverish state, Amira's defenses lowered, and words she had held back began to spill out. She spoke of her parents, of growing up feeling like an outsider in her uncle's home, of finding solace in fixing broken things. Ibrahim listened, really listened, his hand gentle on her forehead as he checked her temperature. One night when her fever was at its highest, she murmured, I want to understand why you chose me. The real reason. Ibrahim was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. I saw you at that bicycle shop, months before the dinner party at your uncle's house. You were teaching a group of neighborhood children how to repair their bikes. Your patience, your kindness, it reminded me so much of Layla." He paused, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted her blanket. "I started asking about you, learning about your life. When I discovered your uncle's financial troubles, He stopped, shame coloring his voice. "I manipulated the situation, created additional pressure on his business, knowing he would eventually need my help." The confession hung in the air between them. Even through her fever haze, Amira felt the weight of this truth. "You orchestrated everything?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I convinced myself it was justified, that I could give you a better life while gaining a partner who could help continue Layla's legacy. I didn't expect—" He trailed off, struggling with words that seemed foreign to his usual precise speech. "Didn't expect what?" Amira asked, her heart pounding despite her weakness. "Didn't expect to feel this way," he whispered. "To care so much that the thought of losing you to illness terrifies me more than any business crisis ever could." As her fever finally broke days later, Amira found herself looking at their marriage in a new light. The manipulation that had brought them together should have angered her, but instead, she felt an odd sense of understanding. They were both broken people, trying to piece together something meaningful from the fragments of their past. The return to Dubai brought with it a shift in Amira and Ibrahim's relationship. The city's familiar skyline seemed different somehow, as if Paris had altered not just their understanding of each other, but their perception of the world itself. The truth of Ibrahim's manipulation in orchestrating their marriage hung between them, not as a wall but as a bridge of unexpected honesty that had somehow brought them closer. One morning, as they shared breakfast on their penthouse balcony, Ibrahim broke their comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about what happened in Paris," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "About everything I confessed. You have every right to be angry, to feel betrayed." Amira considered his words carefully, watching the sun glint off her teacup. "I should be angry," she admitted, "but instead, I find myself understanding you better. We all make choices based on our wounds, don't we?" Ibrahim's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee. "You're remarkably compassionate, Amira. Just like—" He stopped himself, but she finished the thought. "Like Layla?" She smiled gently. "You can say it. I'm not trying to replace her, Ibrahim, but maybe understanding her helps us understand each other." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the Foundation's office. The Vocational Training Center project had hit an unexpected obstacle. Local business owners were protesting, claiming it would hurt their existing enterprises. Among the most vocal opponents was a name that made Amira's heart skip: Karim. "He's back in Dubai," Ibrahim said quietly, watching her reaction. "And he's not alone. He's partnered with several other small business owners to challenge the project. They're saying it's an attempt by big business to squeeze out local entrepreneurs." The news hit Amira like a physical blow. Karim had returned not to see her, but to oppose the project she had poured her heart into. The project that had, unexpectedly, helped her find purpose in her new life. Ibrahim surprised her by asking, "Would you like to meet with him? Perhaps, if he understood the true purpose of the project." "You would trust me to handle this?" Amira asked, studying his face for signs of jealousy or doubt. "I trust you completely," he replied simply. "Besides, you understand his perspective better than anyone. You can bridge the gap between his world and ours." The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a small cafe in the old part of Dubai. When Amira arrived, she found Karim already, waiting, looking both familiar and somehow changed. Success had given him a new confidence, but there was something else in his expression she couldn't quite read. "You look well," he said after an awkward moment of silence. "Marriage seems to agree with you." "You look successful," she replied carefully. "I heard your business has grown considerably." Karim's expression hardened slightly. "Yes, no thanks to your husband's foundation. We've worked hard to build our businesses from nothing, Amira. We can't all rely on billionaire benefactors." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the gentle, optimistic Karim she remembered. "The training center isn't meant to compete with existing businesses," she explained. It's about giving opportunities to those who have none, just like you once did for neighborhood children in your shop. Something flickered in Karim's eyes at the memory. That was different, he said, but with less certainty. Was it? Amira leaned forward. You taught me that the greatest joy comes from helping others find their path. That's all we're trying to do on a larger scale. As they talked, Amira began to understand that Karim's opposition wasn't really about the training center at all. It was about proving something, to himself, to her, to the world. His success had come at a price, hardening some of the gentle spirit she had once loved. Returning home that evening, she found Ibrahim in his study, pretending to work, but obviously waiting for news of the meeting. The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. He was trying so hard to do the right thing, to be the right kind of husband, even when it meant facing his own insecurities. You've changed him, she said suddenly, surprising them both. Your manipulation, as wrong as it was, led him down a path that changed who he is. And it changed me too, but maybe not in the ways you expected. The Dubai summer had reached its peak, the heat shimming off the glass and steel towers like waves of invisible energy. Inside the foundation's conference room, Amira stood before a group of local business owners, including Karim, presenting a revised vision for the vocational training center. Ibrahim sat quietly in the corner, his presence supportive but deliberately understated. This was her moment to bridge the gap between two worlds. What we're proposing isn't competition, Amira explained, her voice steady and passionate. It's collaboration. Each of you has built something valuable from the ground up. You understand what it takes to succeed in ways that no corporate manual could ever teach. That's why we want you as partners, not opponents. She unveiled the new plan, a program where established local business owners would serve as mentors, sharing their real-world experience with students. The foundation would provide resources and support, but the heart of the teaching would come from the community itself. As she spoke, she saw the hostility in some faces gradually transform into interest. Karim, however, remained skeptical. And what's in it for the business owners, besides feeling good about helping others? His tone carried a challenge, but Amira detected something else beneath it, a hint of the idealistic young man who had once taught neighborhood children for free. Beyond the financial compensation for your time as mentors, she responded, you'll have first access to trained apprentices for your businesses. Plus, the foundation will provide matching funds for expansion projects that create new jobs. She paused, then added softly, sometimes the greatest reward in teaching others is rediscovering what made us fall in love with our work in the first place. The words struck home. She saw Karim's expression shift, remembering perhaps those simpler days in his small shop. Other business owners began nodding, talking among themselves about the possibilities. Ibrahim caught her eye from across the room, his face showing quiet pride. Later that evening, as they walked through the garden of their penthouse terrace, Ibrahim broke their comfortable silence. You were remarkable today, he said. You found a way to honor both worlds, the corporate and the personal, the powerful and the humble. It's something I never managed to achieve. Amira stopped by the small fountain they had installed, watching the water catch the last rays of sunset. Maybe because you were trying to do it alone, she suggested, carrying the weight of Layla's legacy and your own expectations at the same time. Ibrahim's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally now. I've been thinking about legacy, he said quietly, about how Layla would see what we're doing. She always said, true change comes from connecting hearts, not just writing checks. She was right, Amira replied, turning to face him. And maybe that's what we're really building here, not just training centers or charitable programs, but bridges between people, between ways of life. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine as they stood together, the city lights beginning to twinkle around them. Ibrahim's face held an expression she had never seen before, a vulnerability mixed with something deeper. Amira, he began, his voice unusually hesitant. I need to tell you something. When I manipulated circumstances to bring you into my life, I thought I was seeking someone to continue Layla's work. But I realize now that wasn't the whole truth. I was looking for someone to heal my own heart, even if I couldn't admit it to myself. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Amira felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of recognition, of seeing finally the complete truth of their journey together. "And I thought I was sacrificing my chance at love for duty," she whispered. "But maybe sometimes love grows in unexpected places, nurtured by shared purpose and understanding, rather than passion's first flash." Ibrahim's free hand rose to gently brush away a tear from her cheek. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way their arranged marriage had never predicted. "Is that what's growing between us?" he asked softly. "Love?" Before she could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The Business Owners Coalition, led by Karim, had reached a decision about the partnership proposal. As Ibrahim read the message, his expression transformed from concern to surprise to joy. "They've all agreed," he said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "Every single one of them. Karim wrote that your words reminded him of why he started his business in the first place, to make a difference in people's lives." The news should have been the highlight of Amira's evening, the culmination of weeks of work and worry, but somehow it felt secondary to the moment of truth she and Ibrahim had just shared. They had begun their marriage as two people bound by duty and manipulation, but something else had grown in that carefully tended garden of mutual respect and understanding. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. As Amira and Ibrahim stood together outside the newly renovated building in one of Dubai's oldest neighborhoods, the structure, once abandoned, had been transformed into something extraordinary. A community center that would house both the vocational training programs and a memorial gallery dedicated to Layla's artistic works and humanitarian vision. "She would have loved this," Ibrahim said softly, his arm around Amira's waist as they watched workers installing the center's sign, the Layla Al-Rashid Community Arts and Skills Center. The name had been Amira's idea, a way to blend the practical training programs with the artistic spirit that had driven Layla's humanitarian work. Inside, the space had been designed to reflect both aspects of its mission. One wing housed modern workshops for vocational training, while the other contained gallery spaces where local artists could exhibit their work alongside Layla's preserved pieces. The central courtyard, with its fountain and garden, served as a gathering space where people from all walks of life could meet and share ideas. Karim arrived early for the center's preview event, looking more like his old self than he had in months. The success of his business partnership with the foundation had softened the edge of bitterness that had briefly hardened him. He had taken on the role of lead instructor for the bicycle repair program, his natural talent for teaching finally finding its full expression. "You've created something remarkable here," he told Amira as they walked through the workshop area. "It's everything I dreamed of doing with my little shop, but on a scale I never imagined possible." His smile was genuine, peaceful. "Thank you for helping me remember who I really am." Ibrahim joined them, and Amira watched with quiet joy as the two men discussed plans for expanding the training program. There was no tension now, no lingering rivalry, just shared purpose and mutual respect. She thought about how far they had all come from that day in the bicycle shop that had set everything in motion. Later that evening, after the preview, guests had departed. Ibrahim led Amira to a special room in the gallery wing that had remained locked throughout the event. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he unlocked the door. Inside, Amira gasped. The walls were covered with photographs, not just of Layla, but of all the lives she had touched. Children in refugee camps smiling as they painted, women proudly displaying their artisan crafts, communities gathering to celebrate new schools and clinics. And among these images were new ones, photographs of the training center's first students, of Karim teaching, a group of eager apprentices, of local artists working with underprivileged youth. "This room tells two stories," Ibrahim explained, watching Amira's face as she took it all in. "It shows how one person's love can ripple out to touch countless lives, but it also shows how love can heal and transform, creating new ripples of its own." He turned to face her fully. "Amira, when I brought you into my life through manipulation and calculation, I thought I was just seeking someone to continue Layla's work. But you've done so much more than that. You've taught me that honoring her memory doesn't mean living in its shadow." Amira felt tears welling in her eyes as Ibrahim continued. "You've shown me that real love isn't about replacing what was lost or fulfilling a duty. It's about growing together, healing together, building something new while respecting what came before." She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We've both learned that lesson, haven't we? That love comes in many forms, and sometimes the deepest kind grows slowly, nurtured by shared purpose and understanding." Ibrahim pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been thinking about what you said about bridges, about connecting different worlds. You've built so many, between past and present, between privilege and need, between duty and desire. But most importantly, you've built a bridge to my heart, something I thought would never be possible again." The sound of music drifted in from the courtyard. Some of the young artists had returned with their instruments, filling the evening air with melody. Ibrahim smiled, a full, unguarded expression that transformed his entire face. "Dance with me?" As they swayed together in the gallery of memories, both old and new, Amira realized that their story had become something neither of them could have predicted. What had begun as an arrangement, a calculated exchange, had blossomed into something profound and real. They had found love not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in the quiet moments of understanding, in shared purpose, in the gradual opening of wounded hearts to new possibilities. 1 year after the opening of the Layla Al-Rashid Community Arts and Skills Center, Amira stood in the same courtyard where she and Ibrahim had danced that memorable evening. The space had blossomed beyond their wildest dreams, becoming a vibrant hub where art, education, and community service merged seamlessly. The fountain bubbled peacefully, surrounded by blooming jasmine that perfumed the evening air. The center had transformed not just the neighborhood, but countless lives. Under Karim's guidance, the vocational training programs had graduated their first class of students, many of whom had already started their own small businesses or found meaningful employment. The art gallery had become a celebrated space for emerging local talents, with exhibitions that drew visitors from across the city. Ibrahim appeared beside her, slipping his hand naturally into hers. "Lost in thought?" he asked, his voice carrying the warmth that had become familiar over the past year. The hard edges of the businessman had softened, though his strength remained, now channeled into building dreams rather than just empires. "Thinking about how much has changed," she replied, leaning into him. "About how what began as an arrangement has grown into something so much more beautiful than either of us imagined possible." They walked together through the gallery wing, now expanded to include a new exhibition, a collection of photographs documenting the center's first year. Images of students learning, artists creating, communities gathering, all testament to the power of shared vision and purpose. Among them were more personal moments, Amira and Ibrahim working side by side, their heads bent together over plans, Karim teaching a group of children basic bicycle maintenance, the whole community celebrating various milestones. "You know," Ibrahim said, stopping before a particular photograph of them at the opening ceremony, "I spent years trying to honor Layla's memory by recreating what she left behind, but you taught me that the greatest honor we can give to those we've lost is to create new love, new hope, new beginnings." Amira touched the pendant she still wore, her mother's last gift, now a symbol not of loss, but of continuity. "We all carry those we've lost in our hearts," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean we stop growing, stop loving, stop living." They made their way to the rooftop garden, another new addition to the center. The setting sun painted Dubai's skyline, in shades of gold and rose, the modern towers gleaming against the desert sky. Below they could hear the sounds of the evening's activities, music from the community orchestra practice, laughter from a children's art class, the gentle whir of tools from the workshop. "I have something to show you," Ibrahim said, leading her to a secluded corner of the garden where a small fountain burbled quietly. He withdrew an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. Inside, Amira found photographs of a familiar bicycle shop, but not as she remembered it. The images showed an expanded space, modernized but maintaining its humble charm. "Karim's shop?" she asked, puzzled. Ibrahim smiled. "The first of many. The foundation is launching a network of community repair shops, each serving as a satellite training center and social hub. Karim will oversee the program, his dream of helping others multiplied across the city." Tears welled in Amira's eyes as she understood the beautiful symmetry of it all. The place where their story had begun would now become part of their shared legacy, touching even more lives. "But that's not all," Ibrahim continued, his voice growing softer. "A year ago we danced together in that gallery, and I realized something I'd been too afraid to admit." He took both her hands in his. "I realized that what began as an arranged marriage had become the greatest gift of my life, that the woman I chose for all the wrong reasons had become right for all the right ones." Amira felt her heart swell as Ibrahim continued, "You've taught me that real love isn't found in grand gestures or perfect plans. It's built day by day through understanding, growth, and shared purpose. You've helped me heal, not by trying to replace what I lost, but by showing me how to create something new and beautiful from the fragments of the past." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues, Ibrahim pulled her close. "I love you, Amira," he whispered. "Not because of duty or arrangement, but because of who you are and who I've become with you by my side." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both new and familiar, like a truth that had been growing in her heart all along. "We found love in the most unexpected place, not in passion's first flash, but in the quiet moments of understanding, in shared dreams, in the gradual opening of our hearts to new possibilities." As they stood together in their rooftop garden, overlooking the city they were helping to transform, Amira realized that their story was more than just a tale of arranged marriage turned to love. It was a testament to the power of authentic connection, of healing through purpose, of finding beauty in life's unexpected turns. The center below hummed with activity, a living monument to what can grow when hearts and minds work together in harmony. Their love story had become part of something larger, a ripple effect of positive change touching countless lives, proving that the greatest love stories aren't just about two people finding each other, but about the light they create together in the world. Faimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Amira and Ibrahim has touched your hearts as deeply as it has transformed their lives. Their story reminds us that love often blooms in unexpected places, growing stronger through understanding, shared purpose, and the courage to open our hearts to new possibilities. For more touching stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the power of love to heal and transform, please subscribe to our channel by clicking the button below. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what moments in Amira and Ibrahim's journey resonated most with you. Remember to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of love, growth, and the beautiful surprises life has in store. Join us again tomorrow for another touching tale that will remind you of the extraordinary power of the human heart.